I'd like to just introduce the speakers today. So you'll hear briefly from me. You will also hear from Professor Andreas Weiler, Ilka Inglo, Dimitris Batalas, and Andy Emmons from Transport for London. Each of us will be taking a different kind of a take on our research, trying to relate it to the theme of organising and organisations. So just to set the scene, we're all aware that that digital transformation has influenced our work practices, our work organizational structures, and even to some degree, organizational decision making. And to some extent, we are all aware that existing practices maybe, could be, should be considerably transformed by the advent of technology. We're also seeing in the workplace many new jobs being formed, many new jobs expecting to appear, and many jobs being altered. So essentially, our work stream in the Digit program is really thinking about these issues. How has the digital transformation, digital technologies, digital innovations affecting our work, affecting the way we organize, affecting the organization we work for? We're also interested in themes that relate to things like, can we do this? Can we incorporate technology in a responsible way? You'll probably hear over the next couple of days more thoughts on whether the advent and the use of digital technologies can promote things like better well-being at work, better well-being of staff. So in a sense, our talk today is to really give a little bit of a taster to the sorts of things we're doing, but we're also trying to relate the things we're doing to some of these issues that I've just outlined around how we can do things more responsibly, how can we promote well-being at work. And as I said, these are the speakers that will be giving you their words of wisdom this afternoon. I've already mentioned who they are, and I'm sure they'll be happy enough to sort of restate who they are and what they're going to be talking about as they speak. So I'm just going to send out some post-it notes about some work I've been doing in relation to decision making. And this is with my DBA student, doctoral student from Warwick University. He is a head of a procurement group, the procurement function at a large professional service organization. And he's been really exercised by the puzzle or problem around whether automation or technology can support decision making at the C-suite level and also at the board level. In essence, the puzzle that he's interested in, and we've been discussing and looking at over the last few years, is that we recognize there's a lot of sort of agency conflict, which automating decisions might help resolve. It's still unclear how far the support of automation, AI, natural language processing, machine learning can help readdress or even address some of the issues around decision making. We're all aware that some of the simple decisions, some of the more easier decisions can be readily automated, but we also know the sorts of puzzles and problems it presents to those who are affected, associated, or aligned with some of those things, areas which have been automated. But we're also interested in the fact that high-level, high-stake decision-making is probably where we've seen less interaction, less involvement of digital technologies to support high-risk, high-stakes decisions. We're also aware that a lot of the sort of issues pertaining to understanding the appropriateness of automation for decision making is the fact that we have an avalanche of data and this sort of auditory belief that that avalanche of data is fueling the need to automate decision making. Again, that's not a clear clear position for many in organizations, but it is something that seems to almost be an accepted belief that, you know, with data we can move towards automating many and a lot of decision making in organizations. Some of the things, obviously, that appeals is the fact that, our technologies can deal with a lot of messy, ugly, and wide-ranging data through all sorts of technologies, such as connected devices, algorithms, and so on. But the one thing that crops up quite a lot is the sense that human decision-making is error-prone, but machines are tireless and impartial, and can sort of reduce the error-strewn, error-prone ways in which we go about our decision-making. We also notice, that when it comes to highly prized, high-stakes decision-making, this is really where the level of uncertainty about the use of technology is extremely high. The number of people we've interviewed and talked to is that we really have to, that they ask us to double down on the point that machines still cannot be creative, still cannot deal with uncertainty in the way in which decision makers at the high end of organizations tend to be. An example of this is sort of decisions around capital allocation and so on. The other thing that this drives is also at that high end of decision making at the board level or at the senior exec level. The human creativity creates the conditions whereby decisions could be can be exponentially high, or growing exponentially high. The number of decision options, a number of potential outcomes become increasingly complex and difficult to really appraise. So that high-end, high-stakes level of decision-making is probably the least part of our decision-making spectrum, whereby we haven't yet seen how automation can absolutely support those in those positions. What we've done, and I said I'm post-noting because I don't really have time to go through all of this in detail, but post-noting the kind of stuff we've been doing, we have interviewed quite a number of C-suite executives in professional service firms, and also board members of a number of large firms, and to get their feelings and insights into some of the issues and difficulties around decision making and the implications of automation supporting or enabling decisions at different points at different places within the organization. And in a sense, we've come up with a simple model, and this is where we're almost making a plea to you in the audience, is how we could roll this idea out and get more sort of bearing on the thoughts we're having about our model, which kind of starts to encapsulate some of the sorts of things we think are interesting within organizations. So we from those interviews and from the sort of reflections in our study, we noticed there are pressures on around decision making coming through the sort of combination of data complexity and data sufficiency. So just in a nutshell, with low data complexity and low data sufficiency, these are normally where you see decision making at the board level. There's an engineering bottleneck. There's not sufficient opportunities for technology to really support decision making, and these are normally at the high stakes, high end decision making where decision makers are. But clearly, where we have a high level of complexity, high volume of data with high data sufficiency, these are the areas in which we see automation taking root, taking place, and and pushing what we call kind of coping pioneering. What's left is where there is the gray zone, the zone that we think is really, really important. And in that gray zone decision areas, it's still unclear around the potential for supported decision making. There are lots and lots of pressures on in terms of whether it's enhancing, augmenting, or supporting decision making. And we feel this is where conversations should be going on in organizations to try and sort of think through what the barriers and opportunities are for the use of technology. I mean, there's lots of implications we think that there is with this research. These are a few, and again, I apologize for sort of just bullet pointing them and going them over very quickly. But we feel there is some energy in the work we're doing to try and create the conditions of possibility to have a conversation about the impact of technology on the decision-making processes from the ground up in organizations. Again, these slides can be made available to you. And again, I apologize for the sort of the speed and rapidness of the presentation. I'll now hand over to Andreas, who will talk about another aspect of the research we're doing in our project.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the role of automation for employees and how that elicits certain types of work behaviors. But let me start with a little thought experiment. When I ask everyone in this meeting what you would think about task automation, I would assume that the result to that question is most likely very positive. But in contrast, when I go on and ask employees what they think about the automation of their tasks, probably the outcome is not that positive. And the main reason for that is that employees think about automation mainly from a job perspective and the fear of losing their job because it becomes automated. And research has picked this perspective up and has looked at the consequences of job automation from a perspective where it introduces employee reskilling, upskilling, learning new things, jobs that are altered, all the points that Leroy has mentioned before. So the ultimate goal in the end is that employees don't end up unemployed. However, when we take a step back and we look at this conundrum that we see here, it also becomes very obvious that this perspective assigns employees a very passive role. So they are the recipients of automation that have to react to it and that also need to be taken care of by reskilling or upskilling or finding a new job. So in contrast, we have taken a different, more nuanced, but also more active perspective on the employees in that situation. And we argue that employees in the end are agentic individuals that react to the automation of their tasks with specific types of behaviors that in the end depend on their perception of automation. And when we talk about specific forms of work behavior, we are interested in the concept of job crafting, as has been seen on the slide before. So in essence, job crafting is bottom-up job design. Instead of the organization deciding, okay, this is how your job should look like, employees take care of that and design their job in a way that it changes the characteristics of their job so that it provides more meaning for them, increases their resources that are available to them, or it just reduces stressful job demands. And research on job crafting has identified two different types of job crafting. One is called promotion-oriented or promotion-focused job crafting that is focused on personal growth, advancement, and development. And on the other side, we have something that is called prevention-oriented job crafting. Here, people are focused on securing and creating safety for their jobs, for themselves, so that they feel safe and secure. And in general, employees can show both types of these behaviors. The problem is that both have opposite consequences for employees and organizations. While promotion-oriented job crafting increases employee performance and has, in general, beneficial outcomes, the prevention-focused one has more negative outcomes. For example, it increases emotional exhaustion. These people are stressed and exhausted at some point, which has then negative consequences for the organizations. So we have now automation of tasks on the one side and job crafting on the other side. And the question that we are interested in our work is how we can combine and link automation and job crafting. And I've already mentioned before, the type of job crafting that employees show in response to the automation depends on how they perceive the impact of automation on their work identity. So we all hold a certain identity about our job. This identity is created by the tasks that we do, and they provide us again with meaning. They give us a purpose why we come to work every day, and over time, they build up our work identity. But not all tasks do that in the same way. Some tasks that we do in our daily business are more relevant to our work identity than others. And this attribution of relevance and significance varies depending on the employees that you see. And now we play a little thought game again. Imagine you automate a task that has very little significance for my personal identity at work. So I don't care that this task is suddenly gone and I don't have to do it anymore. It's not part of my identity, but I'm happy that it's gone. So you probably take something away from me that I won't miss. But on the other side, if you automate a task that you have identified as worth automating, that carries a high significance for my identity, you suddenly take away something that is very important to me because it's a defining element of my job. Which means that when we consider work identity, the automation of one task can have two opposing effects. Either it is perceived as a threat and employees try to compensate this threat and try to avoid it, or on the other side, it's perceived as an opportunity for growth. And here you can see how work identity provides the link between automation on the one side and job crafting on the other side. If you automate a task that people don't attribute a lot or a significant value to for their work identity, they probably see that as an opportunity to expand their work identity and show promotion-oriented job crafting. They use this opportunity for advancement and development and personal growth. But on the other side, if you automate something that is important to them and important to their work identity, you take away something that threatens their identity. And suddenly they try to protect what is left of their identity, which then results in prevention-oriented job crafting, which, as I said before, is focused on security and safety and securing what people have. And when we take automation, work identity, and job crafting behaviors with the different outcomes, positive and negative, what does that mean for organizations? Well, first of all, it increases our complexity. We not only have to identify the tasks that we can efficiently automate, but we also now need to consider the potential impact on employees because it also affects their work identity. And second, if organizations actually do that, it can make the organization more efficient, not only through the means of automation, but at the same time, it can stimulate the potential of employees for development and growth, which in turn will positively affect the organization. But in contrast, on the negative side, if the organization decides to automate tasks that carry a high relevance for one's identity, there might be initial gains through automation, but in the long term, the organization will lose the employees' productivity because these people are focused on saving what is left of their identity. And just to set this right, and please don't get me wrong, these people are doing behaviors that they think are right because they want to protect what's going on. They want to prevent more threats to their identity, more threat to their work, but they do that with the right intentions without realizing that it's actually backfiring. So in the end, tying this to responsible leadership, it's the responsibility of organizational leaders to prevent this identity threat in the first place. So in sum, we argue that automation of tasks can affect people's work identity, and depending on how it does so, it can be either a threat or an opportunity that elicits suitable responses or not suitable responses from employees. So if you are currently working on task automations and you're interested in exploring this mechanism further to prevent any repercussion that I've outlined before, please reach out to us, because then together we can do it in a right way. We can make sure that we facilitate your employees' active involvement in the automation initiative, and we can also use it to make their job, them, and finally your organization better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. And now we will hand over to Dimitris Batalaf.
Hi there. Just a second to share my screen. Okay. Hi, I'm gonna to briefly present the project, which is in the early stages of developing. In this project, which is about digital transformation in law firms, we are aiming to understand the impact of new and emerging technologies on law firms by getting first-hand experience from top executives. We chose law firms, which is part of the professional service industries, because it's one of the industries in which the effects of technology will be most evident in the years to come. Yet, they haven't received much attention when it comes to digital transformation. And that's because, unlike manufacturing firms, for example, which were the ones that were most heavily disrupted by digital transformation, this is not the case for law firms. Initially, law firms were slow to embrace the digital age, but now, and especially after the COVID pandemic, more and more are embracing the changes brought by the digital transformation due to its potential to save on time and the cost. I said, the project seeks to examine how law firms undergo digital transformation. Some of the topics we will study are the level of digital maturity of the firms, which means in which stage of the process firms are and where they place themselves compared to competitors, the factors that may influence digital transformation, the challenges that the firms have to overcome while navigating the process, the digital transformation process, and the influence of digital transformations on a series of organizational and individual outcomes such as structure, organizational culture, job satisfaction, or well-being. As our study, it tends to examine how digital transformation influences law firms. We are interested in the opinions of executives who lead the digital transformation agenda. As such, the target population is C-level executives such as chief digital officers or chief technology officers. So far, a few senior executives were asked to provide their opinion on their company's experience, but we are aiming to interview more within the next few months. Finally, by understanding the phenomenon, we hope we can provide not only insights to the existing academic literature, but also offer implications that will help firms engage in strategic matters. And this now brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitris. I'd like now to hand over to Ilka, who'll talk about some recent research she's been doing.
Great, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm working between two screens. Okay, can you see the slides? Okay, I'm going to talk about a phenomenon that most of you are probably familiar with, namely the Sunday night blues, which, Leroy, you actually moved to Sunday morning in your overview of slides. And interestingly, one of the things we find is that the onset is typically in the afternoon, but some people even start experiencing it actually on Sunday morning or Saturday evening even. So why is this relevant to the digital transformation and the use of technology? So there are several points to this. So one is that one question that the HR world has is, what difference has hybrid working made to mental health, and how can employees be supported? And the other point is that technology, because we can work from anywhere all the time, also has a big impact on actually what we do on a Sunday, and whether we decide to spend the Sunday afternoon or evening on emails or other work or not. So this project then, I'm starting with a very high level insight we have had, is that everyone in our study, now this was just the pilot, has experienced it or is currently experiencing it. And before I delve more deeply into a quick overview of what we found, just some background to the project. So what we are aiming here is to basically create an evidence base to understand, what does it feel like to experience the Sunday night blues? What are factors that are contributing to it? How does it impact your work? So what difference does it make on your Monday? And what other sort of impact does it have on your well-being and mental health? And what can employees, managers, HR professionals, and organizations do? So when I first came to this project, which was actually kicked off by a discussion with so Channel 4, one of the sponsors, I actually thought, why is the Sunday night blues relevant for work? Which employee would be happy to share with their manager on a Monday that they were depressed on a Sunday night about thinking about going back to work? And the relevance is actually that, it seems that the Sunday night blues somehow amplifies issues that employees might have at work. It might also amplify well-being issues, and it could be a way of having a discussion about well-being at work that is kind of through the back door. It's kind of less, if I put it drastically, kind of confrontational compared to speaking about mental health issues or well-being issues straight away from, for instance, a line manager point of view. So yeah, I skip over this. We have basically done a couple of studies. We have just finished another data collection across 3 weekends, where we are looking at how does the blues unfold and how does it impact your Monday. And the ultimate aim is to develop a toolkit that organizations can use to help employees, line managers, HR managers, and the whole organization to combat the Sunday night blues. And I want to share a couple of highlights or preliminary results. So what does the Sunday night blues feel? What does it feel like? I mean, it is generally a quite individual experience, but generally it's about feeling down, and there are slightly different patterns depending on whether you love or hate your job. So these are now outcomes from interviews with 34 people. Basically what we found is that the experience seemed to be slightly different depending on whether you have a high level of job satisfaction, low level, or the third group we basically called people who had a great weekend and they really value the weekend and activities they engage in over the weekend. And these groups can overlap. So interestingly, so the high job satisfaction group, even though they feel happy with their job and they have for instance, what we found in our sample, which is certainly not representative, but people basically had good working conditions, autonomy at work, but there is the internal pressure to prove yourself, to do a good job, kind of nervousness, worry, need for control and productivity. And this usually starts in the late afternoon on a Sunday. And how does it impact work? So, or what factors actually contribute to it? It seems to be worse when people feel there's specific challenges ahead in the week, difficult meetings, or having, for instance, important team meetings on a Monday morning. So one recommendation is actually give employees time and flexibility to decide what they work on a Monday morning. So some organizations decide, for instance, not to have important meetings on a Monday morning. What are the outcomes? So anxiousness, then the tendency to actually check work emails, and some people also actually worry about job security. Low satisfaction, job satisfaction. This is one that seems to be very intuitive. People don't like their job. Of course, they dread the week ahead. And the experience seems to be a bit different. It's slightly more a feeling of being depressed. And it can start much earlier than the Sunday afternoon. People start worrying about having to go back to a job they don't enjoy, sometimes already on a Saturday. And that has quite a big impact, of course, on their whole weekend. In terms of outcomes, people sometimes experience even physical symptoms, and it affects their relationships outside work, being grumpy around their families, friends. And solutions here are really honest discussions with the line manager, looking out for opportunities, for instance, within an organization or changes to a job. Then people who love their weekend can't kind of tie themselves away. Well, they basically are sad that the weekend is over, and this feeling can start. I mean, typically it starts at the end of the weekend, not very surprisingly. And it is really affected by activities that people engage in on the weekend. What are the outcomes? A sluggish start on a Monday morning, feeling a bit disconnected from colleagues. And if people commute, then really dreading the commute. And solutions here are really continuing to work from home on a Monday morning seems to make a difference. People feel kind of comfortable in their own home. They feel they're easing into their week. And also at the same time, making room for non-work related chit-chat in the work context. Okay, that brings me to a quick overview and basically a kind of conclusion just based on the preliminary results. There seem to be work-related factors that contribute to the Sunday night blues and individual ones. And so what we are looking to do in developing the toolkit is to work basically with line managers, with employees, with HR managers to address the work-related factors while taking into account the individual ones. And yeah, that was it really in a nutshell. So if anyone is interested in being part of a focus group or being interviewed as part of the toolkit development, please drop us an email. We are, yes, excited to work this together with people because they will be the ones who we hope will apply the toolkit.
Thank you, Ilka. So the final presentation in the session will be by Andy Emmons. I think I can just hand over to you, Andy, to...
Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. Just share my screen. So can you see the screen? Cool. So I'm going to be talking to you on the basis of sharing a case study within Transport for London of how solving a problem that's led to building a digital twin has driven a new paradigm about how I think about data and how that has led to challenges within the business, and how that potentially has set us up for a conflict with the broader tech and data element, the people who deliver the production environments of our digital twin, and then talk to you a little bit about how I'm thinking about resolving that. So to give you some context, I run an analytical unit primarily related to road space. It's a highly complex environment dealing with a number of trade-offs and involving a high degree of problem solving. I own, and I'm very fortunate in that I'm an unusual business unit in that I have the full chain of command of the data from the sensors. I platform that, clean it, and I organize everything through to the delivery of the business intelligence. And so I develop apps and deliver the business intelligence out of the dashboards the other end. So we have a very specific problem within TfL. We had old-fashioned systems that didn't necessarily relate or talk to each other. And we have a multi-million-pound project called the SITS Integrated Transport Systems Project, of which there are a number of elements. The two elements here underneath this line on the right-hand side, the data service hub and the data roadmap, I'm the business owner of. And what we're trying to do is rethink how we utilize data so that we can deliver some new products. RTO is the replacement for all the traffic signals in London. COV IMS is a new decision support for the control room. Predictive capability is the ability to take on board a situational picture of the road space and use that information to run fast and real-time models and provide mitigations. So the challenge was, how can I develop this new paradigm, think about this new paradigm, what's needed in the future, and how am I going to do this? And this is how conceptually we thought about the digital twin. And so the digital twin in and of itself, through thinking of and solving this problem, led to us an understanding that actually this was going to transform our world as well, just actually the art of building the digital twin. So typically in the business, in a normal paradigm, you adopt a current business data architecture, you develop a bespoke application to do one specific job within the road space. Scope creep comes in, leads to over engineering. But within the business, we've got new technologies and capabilities, and I call this data democratization. We have cloud services, graph databases, open source software. I have data scientists working for me. And therefore the business, you know, given my sort of domain and control of data I have, there's so much I can do for myself. I don't need to run to tech and data to ask them to build me a bespoke system. And so the thought process was the development of a new paradigm around how I could take on board data to answer a lot of the business's requirements. And to do that, the digital twin has 5 layers. It has a data layer, it has a framework layer, it has a graph database layer, a visualization layer, and a plug and play layer. And I'm going to just go through this very quickly because I want to get to the organizational elements that we're concentrated on in this series today. So what is new about how I suddenly thought about data? What if I took all of the business requirements, looked at all of the elements that were the lowest data granularity needed to focus on the most operational question? If I could break that down into each data component, could I actually onboard that data in real time as part of a digital twin and develop a business solution out of it? So that's how I started. Gather all the business requirements together, break them down into their lowest granularity data components. Think of a framework in which I can organize that data and I can align all the data across all the complex bits of the business I need, fully multimodal information on all the elements of our business. So developed a framework, called it a common operational road network. And the idea is it has 65,000 links, and all that data that I talked about can be attached to each of these links. And with this framework, the idea is that if I do this attachment to each of these links that I have on the road network, I can begin to drive high leverage out of that because the way I'm organizing the data, each of these links has a high amount of metadata associated with them. If I bring in the elements of the key modal dimensions I need, like journey times, flows, and origin and destination occupancy, I can then quickly leverage this out. And because I have this data in very low granularity, work to recombine it to answer a lot of the business's requirements, like 90%. I can use it to calculate algorithms. Because I've aligned the data, I know my outcomes, and I can actually provide explanation power of cause and effect, never able to do for that. I can use the framework to do things like control variance, and I can use it to do strategic planning by just reorganizing the data. If I add together all the components, I can answer the bigger questions that we have about how does this affect inner London or outer London or the boroughs. So we've talked about the data and we've talked about organizing that within a framework. But if I align that framework with a graph database, like a Neo4j graph database, the one we use, which is the power behind what powers Google, etc., I begin to add in extra value because a graph database, which is highly aligned with how a road network works, I can map all the key relationships about how people route through and use the network. And I can begin to pre-attach all the data in this setup, in this framework, and the graph database adds the context of how it all links together and how people might want to route through that network. And within graph database technology, I have ability to do things like clustering and centrality and routing. And this adds to my leverage points. I actually have all this data, I've organized it and structured it well. And now I have this extra capability of adding value to that data in terms of actually how people move through the network, and I can do things like outline instance and define instance using these techniques within the graph database. I'm just going to skip this quickly, but there is an element that you have to build a very detailed visual layer within a graph database to provide context for how humans digest this data in a digital twin. And then the idea in principle is, having combined all the layers of the digital twin, I've got these plug and play modular components that I can sit on top of just this one source of the truth. And that's a key element of this project. And I can deliver lots of different outcomes from this one version of the truth that I've generated at the bottom of this digital twin. So what are the success factors? One version of the truth was actually quite critical here. It's very clear that it had to be understand very clearly the path between your data and the delivery of the key business insight. You need to be very clear on your purpose and objectives, so don't overreach what this particular digital twin set out to do. It had a very specific business purpose when around identifying, detecting incidents on the road network. A digital twin needs context, so we need to invest heavily in metadata. We have to think through the graph database and how we can deliver using the functionality that's within the graph database, and we have to think through all the modular design. We have 5 layers that I talked about, but a judicious recombination, reaggregation of that data allows for many multiple outcomes, and ultimately it simplifies the architecture as well. So this slide I'll skip over a bit. I've talked about the 5 layers, but essentially it's saying no more than you actually need to have a very clear strategic alignment of all those layers if you're going to make a digital twin work. So the key elements of the talk we get to now, which is all about the organizational success factors within the business. So what allowed this? Within the business, I run a very distinct entrepreneurial problem-solving unit. It may be a bit unique in some businesses, but data democratization has been a big driver to the success of this. You know, the fact that I run my own AWS cloud system, that I adopted graph database, I have data sciences. It's very important that my unit's aligned with the operational business and the trust there. It's very important that there's very good strategic overview of the business, that the business is well understood. Not many people who work in data have that context. So being able to stretch over and really understand how the data translates. Metadata is absolutely essential. So having and looking after your metadata and bringing that together is key. What has actually made the digital twin a success, and I think this is one of the key factors, is the preloading of the metadata. That does away with much of the need for very complex data infrastructure. If I can pre-program the data as it comes in real time, and it picks up all the contextual information in the digital twin, and then I transfer that over to a data lake, it already has all its contextual information. I can get data scientists to drop data frames right on that and drive outputs from that, dashboards, etc. In a normal paradigm, my business would say, you need to build lots of infrastructure the other side of all this data to add all the context and to deliver all that context. I've done away with a lot of the complexities that would normally sit within the business to drive that. Being able to work quick and fast and ultra agile is important. Investing in good data governance is important. And you do need to have a controlling mind across the sheer complexity of this business. Benefits, this new paradigm has led to great cost savings. So if I asked tech and data to build specific units to do this, it would cost many millions of pounds per unit of whatever I wanted to build. I actually run this AWS infrastructure for about £150,000 a year. I can answer many, many more business questions than before. I can provide key operational insights not previously available because I can do this cause effect analysis, and the model is fully scalable to new data and new organizational frameworks. So this is my last slide, and what I wanted to do was contrast this with how things would normally be done within tech and data, within TfL. Now, tech and data organize much of the rest of data outside of my business unit. And typically what would happen is that work is instigated by the business to build products to solve isolated business problems. And the fact that there isn't a clear data strategy aligned with the business means there's no coordinating mind that says, well, if I do this for this part of the business, it also solves a problem somewhere else in another part of the business. In their world, all solutions must be aligned to Microsoft products, which stifles innovation. So they sort of invest heavily in product and product managers rather than data and data capabilities. Their delivery model relies on capturing business requirements. And then once they've done that, those business requirements become fossilized. They can, in principle, be quite agile about how they build products. They will form epics and teams to build products quite clearly, but they can be very, very costly. The products are much too costly to build. They're over-engineered. They become locked down. They're very unresponsive to business agile needs. So there's a big conflict at the moment between myself and the requirement that eventually the development of this proof of concept digital twin I have will need to be moved over to this production environment. And it's challenging because I don't want to be locked down by tech and data. I want access to what I have and what I can do. So how am I dealing with that impasse? I'm building an alliance of partners within the SITS data project. investigating potential hybrid models. So can I deliver certain portions of the business needs from within my business unit and and tech and data, and can we work between them? Why do I have to move all my product over to Azure? I'm talking to them about developing a new partnership. Could my business unit be seen as a portion of tech and data? Can we be seen as people that can be trusted to give rights and access rights to this production environment? And then clarifying absolutely when a working environment is needed, a production environment is needed to reduce costs. So that's just a quick flying overview of some of the things that I've come out with as elements of what it takes to deliver a digital twin in Transport for London. Thanks, Leroy.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, everyone. Just to, before we open it up to questions, just to try and remind you about this research program. I mean, the area, our work package really trying to focus on, what's happening on the ground in relation to digital transformation. What does it mean for us organizing? What does it mean for organizations? And what you've heard is a sort of different perspectives on the sort of research project we're trying to develop. From my point of view, looking at the issue of sort of agency conflict in decision making right across the organization. From Andreas, you heard about how do we identify or self-identify when it comes to sort of our jobs being automated, or the potential of aspects of our jobs are being supported by automation. And you've heard issues to do with how workers feel in terms of the oncoming and overlaying of sort of hybrid working, with an exemplar around the Sunday night blues. I think I'll get it right this time. And of course, from Demetrius, we heard about the sort of, the professional services are succumbing to a lot of digital transformation. And do we really understand what the implications are for those who are in professions or professionally oriented around the impact of technologies? And then finally, you heard something which I would sort of relate to understanding and exploiting dynamic capabilities within organizations, particular capabilities of adopting technologies to bring about a transformation in the way that the organization might exploit its value. And Andy was pretty clear about that, how that dynamic capability can be exploited is through recognizing agility, entrepreneur outlook, and so on and so forth. So there is something connecting all of our chat, and it's this gaze at the sort of down on the ground issues to do with organizing and organizations. So I'd like to just open up the opportunity for people to ask us some questions. At the moment, I see one in the chat, which I'll go to. If you don't mind me naming you, Dan. Dan has asked, one version of the truth may not be the whole truth. Could this approach not lead to blind spots? Maybe that's a question for Andy to answer.
My first thought about that was, in a very complex operational environment like we run, safety is a very, very high priority. And one version of the truth is really an important outcome. So how do I avoid blind spots or thoughts about that? And I think that's about thinking about the framework that you have that describes your business, and is that framework scalable or changeable? And some of the thinking is that it's not a dead end. I'm not building a production environment dead end. I'm actually building something that's open architecture and scalable in terms of new data sets, new better quality data sets always coming in, and being able to adapt to business needs. You can't always avoid that issue, though.
And Alan has responded, I think, to the same point. Perhaps this is also addressed by the common phrase, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. If that resonates.
Yes, I mean, some of our challenge is that we don't actually have very good working models of how the network responds to some of our levers. So there has to be a starting point, and actually the coalition of bringing that model together, all that data together, helps us to form models. So some of the thinking about how you deal with this is actually you can introduce different frameworks. I showed you one framework of the road network, which is basically linked to outcomes. There's thoughts about other frameworks about dealing with new performance indicators. Some of the thinking we're having at the moment within TfL is, what about if we organize ourselves, instead of thinking about organizing for journey time outcomes, we actually managed people's journeys based on throughput, how many people are actually utilizing the space. So to do that, I would introduce a new framework, utilize the same data, but a new framework. So that's some of the way that we could adapt and bring new models to bear.
Thank you. I can't see any more questions. I think we've also just reached 2 o'clock. So all that's left for me to say is sort of thank you for your time and patience with our presentation and our talk, and thank you for the comments. I'd also like to thank our speakers for elucidating sort of their areas of interest and areas of research, and wish you all the best, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you very much.